So thanks for those who logged in a little bit early. Um, my guest tonight is Seth Mnookin. He's a professor of science writing at MIT, and he directs the science journalism program there. He's a longtime science journalist and science writer, and was a 2019 to 2020 Guggenheim Fellow. His recent book, The Panic Virus, The True Story Behind the Vaccine-Autism Controversy, won the National Association of Science Writers Science and Society Award and was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. He is also the author of the New York Times bestseller Feeding the Monster, about the Boston Red Sox and hard news, a Washington Post Best Book of the Year. He began his career as a music critic and has covered everything from rare diseases and from the Iraq War to Stephen Colbert and Batman. So welcome. What's that behind us?
What's what? I'm sorry, say that again.
What's behind us on the screen? Oh, that's MIT. Oh, MIT. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. What's behind me? Yeah, sorry. That's the MIT dome. So people don't need to look at my incredibly messy office.
So I was interviewing Catherine Eben, and after 15 minutes, she said, "You haven't asked me why did you write this book?" And so that's how people start. And I said, "Oh, okay. So why did you write this book?" So Seth, welcome, and why did you write this book?
Catherine is always direct and to the point.
Yeah.
So I wrote this book. I started working on it shortly after my wife and I got married, but before we had kids. But we were socializing with more and more couples that had young children, and the topic of whether or not people were going to vaccinate kept coming up, which kind of astounded me because I had never even remotely thought of that as a question. And when I began asking people what was influencing their decisions, it became clear pretty quickly that it was something based on like emotion and intuition, rather than conversations with their doctor or with pediatricians. And I thought that was interesting. This betrays some of my own biases. I had sort of assumed that the people that I knew who were doctors and lawyers and computer scientists and journalists were not making their decisions about their children's health that way. And so that was what initially got me interested in the topic. Yeah, it sort of went off from there. I spent a couple of years. By the time the book came out, I had a kid of my own.
I mean, I've had many people say to me that, when we were growing up, we didn't have as many vaccines as they do now.
Yep.
And I said, well, then that's probably a good thing because now there are more things you can prevent. But
Yeah.
they think, well, it's gotta cost something. And I say, well, it doesn't seem to be, but that's not the logic. So yesterday, the headline in the New York Times was about hospitals seeing measles and all kinds of viruses increasing due to lack of immunizations. And you said that's not surprising,
Yep.
but it was a big headline.
Yes.
And so, do you think people are aware of this?
I think it really depends. And I think it depends where they're coming from. If they're coming at this from a place of kind of anti-vaccine advocacy, I don't think that a rise in infectious diseases is going to have a huge effect, unless their children or someone they know has really serious consequences. And unfortunately, that does happen with measles, with rubella, with all of these diseases. One of the most difficult stories for me to report for my book was about a family whose infant died of pertussis that she almost certainly contracted in the hospital and was too young to have been vaccinated. And those stories are absolutely heartbreaking. But we've seen in the last couple of years, like people having chickenpox parties instead of vaccinating their kids, and in some cases, people having measles parties instead of vaccinating their kids. One of the things that was said to me a lot when I was working on my book and talking with people who were opposed to vaccines was that everyone they know who had measles is fine. And that's sort of self-evident. Like if they know someone who had measles, then that person did not die. And if they know someone who had rubella and still has their sight, they did not suffer some of the potential consequences. I think the thing that's so scary with measles, particularly, is it is the most infectious microbe known to humanity. And it can linger in a room for up to an hour after an infected person has left. And so that's why the threshold for herd immunity for measles is so high. And even beyond hospitalizations, I think part of the calculation that people don't always take into consideration or don't care about is the enormous strain it puts on healthcare systems. There was, when I was working on my book, there was a study that came out at around that time, so a decade and a half ago, that it cost $12,000 to track and contain each individual case of measles. So if there's an outbreak of 30 people, you can do the math on how much that's going to cost. And at a time when, healthcare budgets and medical research is being slashed, that's I think one of the consequences that is not as shocking as all of the people who are getting infected, but really shocking.
So you devote a great deal in your book about the controversy about vaccines and autism.
Yep.
And so that predates Donald Trump, Kennedy. Yep. That goes back a long time. And the person who authored the paper lost his license and went to jail in England.
I don't think he went to jail.
Went to jail. Okay.
I think he just lost his medical license, and he actually did not lose his medical license for this. He lost his medical license because at his son's birthday party, he drew blood from all of the kids for an experiment that he was running, which, again, having children of my own, worst birthday party ever. That is not going to make, or I'm sure did not make his kid popular. But yeah, that paper was eventually retracted by the Lancet. He lost his medical license. And that was all around when the book came out. And I sort of thought, okay, this is going to be an interesting historical artifact. And now this is going to be a chapter that is behind us. And boy, was I wrong.
Papers that get retracted still can be found.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, of course, absolutely. But I thought the fact that the person who had authored the paper had both been sort of defrocked and had the paper retracted would have had some effect. And I think it did. I think actually one very important effect it had is for a while after that, the media no longer referred to this as a sort of on the one hand, on the other hand controversy. Like some people think vaccines are really dangerous, and from then on it was the debunked theory. And the reason I think that was really important is because I really believe that it was the media that fueled this controversy at the outset, because when Andrew Wakefield published this paper in 1999, it is not something, people are not reading the Lancet, and especially not reading a highly technical paper like the one that that Wakefield wrote and making decisions based on that. He gave a news conference that said something completely different from what the paper said, and the press in the UK ran with that the next day, and said doctor urges 3-in-1 jab be discontinued, the 3-in-1 jab being the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. And so right away, there was a lot of on the one hand, on the other hand reporting. And that's one of the reasons why I think the decline in news publications having science journalists is so alarming, because this is something that anyone who had a research or a scientific background who read that paper would realize that it was completely different from what he then went on and said in the news conference. Did not make the same outrageous claims, but what the story that the press ran with the next day was this is a huge issue. There were stories quoting parents who believed that their kids had been affected by vaccines. And I think that really helped set things off for this controversy. But it's also true that there have been vaccine controversies as long as there have been vaccines.
Well, I always thought one interesting thing is that, people now say, well, people are getting hit hardest by not getting these vaccines are in the red states. But back in the 70s and 80s, there was in California and other liberal states, there was a very huge anti-vaccine movement.
Yes.
Again, related to autism and other things. And there was actually a play about it called Eureka Day.
Okay.
Where a PTA board has to decide whether or not to let children come back who have this, because they want to, parents want the kids to go to school.
Right.
So can you tell us about that time in history?
Well, the 70s I'm not as familiar with. I'm more familiar with some of the stuff that was going on in the 80s around the DTP.
Yeah.
And that was a case where a woman who's still active, Barbara Lowe Fisher, really believed that her child had been severely damaged by vaccines, and got a lot of press attention for that, including TV news shows. And that set off a not nearly as significant but not nearly as significant a controversy as ended up arising around the MMR vaccine, likely because it was pre-social media. It was harder to disseminate views outside of the traditional media. So even though there were traditional media outlets that were reporting on this, it was hard to generate the day after day controversy. But I think what is important about that, and then about what developed with the MMR vaccine, is that the parents who were really initiating some of these scares were parents who had been abused is too strong a word, but really neglected by our healthcare system. There were parents oftentimes with kids very, very significantly affected by diseases like autism. I talked with a lot of parents who had kids who were nonverbal, kids that really had difficulty being in public, and oftentimes the response of the medical of their doctors or the medical authorities was like, all right, good luck. We don't know what to do. And that is, I think, a horrible position for a parent to be in. So I came to this book sort of feeling, when I started working on it, not knowing how I would feel about some of the people really behind this. I left working on the book with an enormous amount of sympathy and empathy for those parents. And while I would like to say that if I was in that position, I would not have, decided that my son was harmed by a vaccine, I actually don't know. I mean, I think it's hard for anyone to say what they would have done when they have a kid who's really, really severely affected by a disease. One other quick comment, talking about the 70s, it was in more liberal areas. That's been true more recently. Also, when I was working on my book, I was talking with a California epidemiologist and asking him how they attempted to predict where there might be outbreaks. Again, because of all of the resources that were needed to try and contain these. And he said, oh, that's really easy. We take a map, we put a pin every place there's a Whole Foods, and we draw a circle around it. And those are the areas that are most likely to have outbreaks. And I sort of laughed and waited for him to laugh. But it was clear that while this was a slight exaggeration, he was not completely joking. And I think one of the really interesting things about the anti-vaccine movement is you get people on not just both extremes of the political spectrum, because that's more common when you have people on the extremes that actually end up meeting somehow, but people throughout each side of the political spectrum that really were being swayed by this. And sometimes it was like the natural food movement or the environmental movement. Sometimes it was libertarian when it was not parents who felt like their families had been personally affected.
When my son, when he was very young, he took amoxicillin. He always started having more temper tantrums than usual.
Yep.
I once mentioned that to the doctor. He said, you're the third parent to have told me this. And it was like, no, I haven't seen anything in the literature about this, but he switched into a different one and we never had that again.
Right.
I mean, sometimes things, happen, which, and then again, it might have been just coincidental. I'll never know.
Right.
But, I'm glad I did. So, yeah, I mean, there was a person in Yale, I don't remember his name, but he talked about how that people's belief systems are more important than their political affiliations. And he said there are people on the left and there are people on the right who have been against vaccines, there are people on the left and people on the right who don't trust the government. So lately, so last night we had Science Writers Social, and the person said, well, who do you look for now in the media? Because what happened with CBS this week.
Yeah.
And people don't trust that. They don't trust. There's less. They said there's less science journalists.
Yes.
Why do you think that's so important?
Well, I mean, partially for the reason that I mentioned, that there might be a range of science stories that a general assignment reporter can cover, but it's certainly not all stories. And if you are, and now with funding dropping off also, labs and schools and medical schools and research schools are all trying to get attention for what they're doing, and so are putting out press releases that oftentimes hype the results way beyond what the actual results show. And so if you don't know what the difference between, a double-blind experiment is and a non-controlled experiment is, that's going to be a big problem when you're trying to read a press release and figure out, all right, how much stock should I put in this? How should I consider this? So that's one of the reasons that I think it's an enormous problem. But I'm not someone who says, look, if we just had more science journalists, there would not be a vaccine crisis. But I do think that a big issue is that there are not local journalists in communities who are trained in science reporting. And one of the paradoxical things of the last couple of decades is, as trust in the media has plummeted, you've not seen the same effect on trust with local news. with local news that is really present in the community and that is active in the community and knows the people in that community. And I think, that's a clear area where the country is hurt by not having science journalists. And you can see it in vaccines. You can see it in climate. You can see it in all sorts of issues. But science journalism is also, it's one of the things that is expensive and not needed all the time, because there are stories that can be written by general assignment report. If you're doing a story about the emotional effects on emergency room doctors and nurses during the first days of the outbreak, you can have a feature writer probably do a really good job on that. So you need high paid reporters who are going to be utilized all the time, but their specific expertise might not be needed all the time. And, when budgets of news organizations are just being decimated, it's not hard to see why that's something that would go.
So for those listening in, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them. I wanted to talk a little bit. You gave an example of Jenny McCarthy.
Yeah.
Was a very, was very. She was the wife of Jim Carrey. She was on talk shows all the time. I haven't seen her in a long time, but I look at that like Elvis Presley was photographed getting a polio vaccine.
Yeah.
And some actors and celebrities. They also, got the COVID vaccine.
Yep.
Dolly Parton was a contributor from Moderna. So, in this age where people can just go to the internet and look up things, they can find, they can find people, they can find all these people on talk shows. They can find them on Instagram and YouTube. Do people not know? I mean, supposedly there's more information than ever. I've had people tell me, well, I do my own research.
Yes.
I said, you don't have to. I said, there are scientists who are doing it for you.
Right.
Who probably know more than you do.
Yes.
And they look at me and say, well, why would they? I said, because that's what they do, So I remember they were saying that, when people are skeptical about science, they said they still want pilots who've been trained. They still want elevator, inspectors. They still want someone, they want building inspectors. They want their cars to be, built by engineers and not by do-it-yourself people. So there is skepticism about science, but there's also a recognition of some expertise.
Yep.
But we're in that very funny position where there are experts who are saying, it's safe to have the vaccine, you should get the vaccine, and people are skeptical about that.
Yeah.
They're not skeptical about someone saying, don't go in that rocket.
Right.
The elevator, is missing, is not working. Don't go in it. They're not skeptical about that.
Yep.
They're not skeptical about, you got to construct a house a certain way. So I'm just wondering, how did we get here? Where the scientists are so not respected.
Well, so talking specifically about vaccines, I think there are a couple of issues and a couple of reasons we got there. One is because when vaccines work, it's invisible, right? You never know if you would have gotten measles or pertussis or polio or any vaccine-preventable disease if you get a vaccine and don't get it. So it's something that, and also, again, as a parent, like bringing your infant child in to get shots is not fun. Like even though I had already been working on this book for a while, when we took our son in for his first series of inoculations and I was holding him in my arms and, here comes a shot and he starts screaming, I felt like he was looking at me saying like, what the hell, dude? Like we had a contract here. I would be cute and you would make sure that nothing happened to me, and you just broke that. I'm sure that's not what he was thinking, but it's something where the benefits are invisible, and there is discomfort involved in it. So, but I think with vaccines, what happened is the scientific community was speaking to the scientific community in the press. And I mean by that, Jenny McCarthy would go on Oprah Winfrey's show and say, I know what happened. My son was fine. He got a shot. The next day, everything changed. The light went out of his eyes. Everything changed. And a scientist is going to say, well, given the preponderance of evidence at this time, it does not appear that there is any connection between vaccines and any of these developmental disorders. And in science speak, that's basically saying like, yeah, there's no connection. In parent speak, that sounds really, really mealy-mouthed. And so I think an issue around this and around science in general is that people in the scientific and the medical community are not comfortable speaking in absolutes, because nothing is you can't prove a negative. So I can never say, yes, absolutely, I know that vaccines are not causing this type of damage. The same way I cannot say, I know 100% that if I go on the roof of this building and jump off, I'm not going to fly. I can say that there's a lot of evidence indicating that I'm probably going to fall to my death if that happens. But I can't say I am 100% sure because we haven't run out every scenario. So I think that was one of the reasons why celebrities were really, and not just celebrities, but parents who were willing to speak in absolutes, why that resonated much more than hearing the head of the NIH say, yeah, we've done studies on 8 million children, and because we haven't seen any of this in any of those children, we're confident that just sounds like mush to parents a lot of the time. And the other thing that I think the was missing, especially with Jenny McCarthy, is, for those of you who might not know who Jenny McCarthy is, she was a very big deal in the 90s and early aughts. I think she was on the cover of Playboy 6 times. She was on an MTV show. She was a big personality. And so when she started speaking out about this, there were people in the medical community who felt like, no one's going to take this person seriously. Why? There's no reason for us to worry about that. And what they were missing was that when Jenny McCarthy was speaking on Oprah or was featured on the cover of People, or she was not being featured as someone who'd been on the cover of Playboy 6 times, she was being featured as a mother who felt like the medical community was not listening to her. And that is something that a lot of parents feel. And it's something that, given the incredibly short wellness visits that babies get, like 15 minutes and infants get and children get, is totally understandable. You go in with a bunch of questions, and it's like, look, I'm sorry, I can't, we're done. I need to get to my next appointment, and I have 4 appointments an hour. That's gonna leave parents with a bad taste in their mouth. I noticed David Ash had a question, which I think is a great question. Is it common for publications to accept a study with only 12 participants? How could that have been statistically significant? And so for anyone who's not aware, that is the number of people that were featured in Andrew Wakefield's initial study. It was 12 kids. And so, no, you would never make broad conclusions on a study of 12 children or 12 people, 12 participants. But yes, absolutely, publications will publish studies with 12 participants because that's a case series. And a case series is oftentimes the first step towards then running larger experiments and running double-blind experiments, running long-term longitudinal studies. So it's not unusual to have case series be published. What is unusual is for then the author to say, because of these 12 children that were, according to him at the time, randomly consecutively referred to his clinic, I'm going to make these assumptions. That would be like saying an example I use in my book, which might not be quite as relevant anymore, but an alien comes to Earth and the first family he meets is the Baldwins and decides, well, I guess 100% of Earth people are male and they all are actors who have a penchant for appearing in the tabloids, which would obviously not be true. That would be a case series that you would then want to expand out, and you would see very quickly, oh no, actually, that's not true. What is even more shocking about the Wakefield study is that it turned out those children were not consecutively referred. They were referred, not randomly consecutively referred. They were referred to him by a lawyer who was suing vaccine companies, or who was involved with parents who were suing vaccine companies. So it's not just that this was a small sample size, it's also that this was a cherry-picked cohort. And also, by the way, the paper, not even the study, did not say that there was any correlation, which again is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have science journalists, because a science journalist would have read that paper and realized, wait a minute, he's saying something in this press conference that is completely different than what is in the paper. And if this was true, if what he's saying is true, why wouldn't that get published in the Lancet? I also think it was a horrible mistake of the Lancet to publish that specific study, but that's a whole other story. So, David, I hope that answers your question, David Ash. And if that doesn't answer it, or if you want more clarification, just throw in another question.
I mean, a lot of times, in drug trials, the first thing they do is they test if the drug is safe. It doesn't matter. They're not even testing to see if it's effective.
Yes.
Because if it's not safe, then you can't give it to people. So they may have just a few. They may have just a handful of people, and you had a horrible reactions, and you just say, okay, that's it, and that will be published.
And yeah, well, one problem also, I think, in the scientific literature is that oftentimes those studies are not published, right? Because there's a big issue with publishing null results, and the fact that people don't publish them when null results tell us or in that case, it would not be a null result; it would be a reactive result. Tell us really important information. If you are running an experiment, the sort of ground zero of that is you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You're going into this and you're doing an experiment because you don't know. You're looking into it. And so given that, it should be equally important to publish positive results as it is to publish negative results. So in that case, depending on what the drug was for, if there were reactions but non-fatal reactions or non-life-threatening reactions, it's possible, and in some cases even probable, that then that would have been expanded slightly to see, okay, is this something random, like random noise that we're hearing, or is this something that is a larger issue? Alan Brown asks, I often wonder if poor science education has something to do with the willingness of the public to accept anything from a doctor as a gospel truth. I don't think so. I don't think it's scientific education, unless we're talking about, educating the public at a level of a college major in science. Because, again, a lot of the parents that I was talking to had taken college science courses, had taken all of the AP courses in science, and still the sense of like, I feel this in my gut is so powerful, that I think that is one of the things that has that's a real challenge. And frankly, that I spoke with scientists who were not vaccinating their kids.
Well, I think that also that the old days of when you would go to the family doctor and whatever he said, got, nobody questioned, people now question doctors all the time. And, comedians say, oh, yeah, they go to a doctor and they say, oh, the guy's full of crap. So, or they question the money motivations and all kinds of things
Yeah.
like that. But, they used to be, we used to grow, when I grew up, there's one family doctor that everyone went to, including my friend David Ash, went to the same pediatrician. And, you know, he knew the family, he knew the parents, and stuff like that. And people long for those days.
Yeah.
Instead of going to a place where you have 10 minutes to see a doctor, and
Right.
you need to get a referral to someone else.
And this, this is something that is, I think, has been a big failure of the medical community, that there have not been efforts to address this. So one thing I wrote about after my book came out, I think in the Washington Post, if I'm remembering correctly, is having something like office hours, where one night a month a pediatrician's office is open. They have the doctors there, and parents can come in and ask questions together. It's not like behind closed doors, because then you also have the interaction of one parent saying, well, I heard this, and another parent saying, I heard this. And the reason why things like that are not done, there are issues with patient privacy and parents being comfortable with that. I think parents largely would be comfortable with that, but there's no insurance code for that. You can't bill for office hours. So that is something that I think is so foolish on the part of everyone, on the part of insurance companies, but also on the part of pediatric practices. The amount of headaches that they could save by doing something like that, I think is enormous. And also, it's not just the headaches they would save, it also creates more of what you were just talking about, David, which is like a sense of connection with the doctors as human beings, outside of a setting where it's like they're looking at their watch and saying, I need to go. But there have not been a lot of creative attempts made to address this. Most of the attempts have been communication attempts, trying to figure out what the best way to communicate is. That's another thing that I was very frustrated by, and I actually worked with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences on putting together a working report on this. And that's when my book came out in 2011. There was already a really, really well-established research on communication, the most effective ways to communicate things to people that people were not utilizing. They were saying, like, sort of in the same ways that parents were saying, well, I feel this is better. In large part, the medical community was saying, like, well, I feel this is the right way to communicate this. And there should have been a much more scientific approach to that. Right now, that's much more difficult because we don't have the longitudinal studies on communication in this really bifurcated information environment. So, David.
Also, I just want to say, I think that, many doctors I speak to, they feel frustrated too, that they can't spend the time that they would like to spend.
Yes.
Because, because a lot of doctors, they're not independent practitioners. They work for big practices, and they're rewarded on how many patients they see, and they're not rewarded for the quality of time they spend with them.
Yep, absolutely.
And more and more healthcare systems are merging.
Yep.
And people say, it's, I see on Facebook or whatever, I need an intern. I can't find one who accepts insurance. And doctors I have gone concierge, or they want, a bonus, for you to pay them to see them. And so I think everyone is, I think nobody's really happy where the system is.
Yeah, I mean, we've had two huge hospitals here merge recently, Mass General and Brigham and Women's. It's now Mass General Brigham's. And one of the things that they were going to address right off the bat was efficiencies. And you actually need some inefficiencies in
Yeah.
systems like this. I think it's, you know, it's something very similar to what we're seeing in academia, where there are not just professors, but staffs are being decimated. And the reasoning is, well, this person who does events and planning for this department really only works like 3/4 of the time. And so if that's true, then maybe we don't need someone at all. And in fact, that is crucial. Those roles are crucial to being able to communicate what people are doing to the public. But yeah, and you see that with hospital mergers all the time. Whenever in any industry, VC starts getting involved, especially in old, well-established industries, it usually portends poorly. We saw it happen in book publishing. We saw it happen in media. And we're seeing it happening in healthcare.
Yeah. Um, it takes a long time to get appointments with specialists. Um, it's hard finding doctors. I think I know with child psychiatrists, there are not that many people who do it.
Oh, believe me, I'm well aware.
Okay, yeah, I am too. And I remember I did an article about phantom networks where they published all these doctors, and then there were like 15 doctors, and 10 of them were not didn't treat didn't take children as patients,
Yeah.
and 5 were not in insurance plan.
Yeah, I mean, in order to get when our son was young and we were trying to get him a therapist because he was dealing with some pretty significant issues, we were given a list by Blue Cross Blue Shield of 100 doctors, and we called every one of them, and there were no openings within like a year. But we had to do that in order to get a therapist out of network covered, and that's not, my wife and I are in privileged positions in that I work in academia and can spend some time doing that and not worry about getting fired. My wife could spend some time doing that and not worry about getting fired, but that's not going to be true for most people. And again, those are the types of things that breed distrust into the system.
Yeah, this is the person William Johnson you might want to take.
Yeah. Is anti-vaccine prejudice particularly acute in the U.S., or is it equally prevalent throughout the industrialized world? So that's a really interesting question. I would say anti-vaccine beliefs as opposed to prejudice, but that's quibbling over words. This is something that has occurred in industrialized countries around the world. In fact, until pretty recently, you really only saw anti-vaccine activism in countries that had fully built out healthcare systems, because in any country where any of the diseases were endemic, people were not raising these concerns, or were not getting traction raising these concerns, because everyone could see the consequences of these diseases all around them. It is acute in the U.S., but it's also acute in France and the U.K. And Australia, and it's not something that's unique to us. And again, I think that speaks to the kind of the real specific challenge of vaccines, which is that when they work, you don't know, right? I'm immunocompromised. I get a COVID shot every 6 months. I've only had COVID once. It would be very easy for me to say, like, well, yeah, that's just because I wouldn't have gotten COVID. And no one can say, no, that is definitively false. All anyone can say is, look, if you do this a million times, protect you a very high percentage of the time, and not doing it is going to leave you at risk. But when when no one is getting measles and no one is getting pertussis, it's hard to convey the seriousness of those diseases.
I think people haven't seen people with measles.
Yeah,
And, I mean,
absolutely.
growing, yeah. So,
I mean, and again, measles has killed more children than any other disease in history. And if anyone knows, especially a really young child with measles, that is a torturous condition. Even if you just run through it and then are fine afterwards and there are no long term effects, it is an extremely, extremely unpleasant experience. And there are lots of people who have effects that are not as immediately obvious as death or significant impairment. But it's something that will crop up decades potentially later, and they're unlikely to connect that to the fact that they had measles.
I also get COVID vaccines every 6 months, and I was exposed to it. My grandchildren, and like they had it, I didn't know it, and I didn't get it. I was thinking, well, I just got the vaccine 2 weeks ago, so maybe that protected me, but
Yep.
who knows?
But
Who knows?
exactly. But who knows?
Yeah.
How do you, it's like, well, or maybe I just didn't, maybe it's not as contagious as people think, or maybe just I wouldn't have gotten it. I mean, that is the exact challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only time I got COVID was when my wife and daughter went to an Olivia Rodrigo concert. And even though they were fully masked and everything, they got COVID there. My daughter still feels like it was worth it. I'm not as sure, but
I went to see Wanda Sykes, and I was wearing a mask, and 2 days later, I was sick as a dog. So,
yeah, yeah. Was it worth it?
yeah, she was great. She actually talked about having COVID,
All right.
how much she enjoyed it. Said,
Yeah.
I just,
Why? Wait. Hang on. Hang on. Why did she enjoy it?
She said, I went into my room, I closed the door, I didn't let my wife in, didn't let my kids in.
Right.
I put towels underneath the door so I could smoke dope. People
All
I
right.
just left alone, and then 2 days later, my partner says, I have COVID too. I can come in. She said, no, 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 you have new COVID. You're not coming
Right.
in.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if she really enjoyed it, but
Taking some comedic license.
yeah, I think so. So what are you working on now?
Well, so I have fallen into something I was not aware of previously, because I came from an industry, journalism, where this is not necessarily true. But I am paying the competency tax at an extremely high level. In academia, I think as soon as you show that you're willing to take on more jobs, you get more and more jobs. So right now, I'm department head, the director of a graduate program, and the faculty lead on a $2 million a year research fund. So what I'm mostly working on now is staying awake all day and not sleeping through meetings. When I do have time, I've been working on a project about trauma and about the historical definitions of trauma and how and why those have changed over time. I've given a couple of talks on that, but that's something that I think is really interesting. And to take one example, the reality of PTSD should have been very apparent immediately after World War II. Because there were lots of Jews that survived the concentration camps and lots of Japanese that lived through the bombings and had very clear indications of PTSD as we now understand it. It did not get recognized until white Christian men started coming home from Vietnam and exhibiting those same symptoms. So things like that fascinate me. The way that societal issues or concerns or prejudices impact what we think of as like, well, this is a disease or it's not a disease. There's also been a huge change around that over the past 20 years around sexual trauma. and the acknowledgement that it's much wider spread and that the effects on people are much broader than was initially thought. And a talk I gave maybe now a year ago or so, I looked at movies from the 80s and how they portrayed things like a woman passing out and then her boyfriend handing her off to someone else to lose his virginity, as happened in a John Hughes movie, and all things like that were played for jokes. I was talking about that and talking about the movie Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, where it was definitely not treated as a joke, and that movie was panned. And since then, it's gone through a pretty dramatic reconsideration, and is now considered one of David Lynch's best movies.
We had a lot of people sign up, and a lot of people, and I realized that perhaps the New York Knicks playing tonight may have been a factor.
That's understandably, yeah.
But this is, this is being taped.
Yep.
Everything goes on YouTube, and we have a YouTube channel, and so this will have a long life, because I still get queries from people to see those things.
Yeah.
Anyways, Seth, I want to thank you for spending time with us today. I know you have a busy day, and it's a great book.
Thank you so much.
People, I got it on Kindle, but you can get it from your public library.
Or you can get it in Polish.
Polish,
English, Polish.
It's available on Amazon. It's available if you're we try and support our local bookstores, but it's a very interesting book and a very interesting history.
Yeah, if people do buy, I would love it if you bought it. But if people do buy it, I would also especially love it if you bought it at a local bookstore.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the summer. And,
of course, you too. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Take care.